you have faculty members, and if I count right, among the three of them, they have 5 different Fulbright experiences. I'll just start first without long introductions. You can see their information on the program. Margaret Butler is who did her work in Italy as a Fulbright, is an assistant professor of musicology at the University of Florida. Professor Mindy McAdams is who did her work both in Indonesia and Malaysia, is the professor of journalism, and Dr. Helen Safa, who has worked in Brazil and Spain, and was at one time our director of our Latin American Studies program as well. And without telling who's going to go first, our purpose here today is for them to describe whatever they want to describe, and for you to ask them questions about what's this all about and how do I do it and should I do it. So you decide who wants to go first. Just remember, excuse me, that we only have 45 minutes. So.
I'm Margaret Butler, and I'm an assistant professor of musicology here at UF. My Fulbright experience includes my Fulbright grant that I had as a dissertation, a PhD student, for my dissertation research in Italy. I received a Fulbright for 9 months for dissertation research in Turin, and I was there for 9 months. The main thing I guess I have to say about the Fulbright experience is, as a graduate student, it opens doors for you, and everyone knows that, but it may open doors that you don't even expect. So I would really encourage all of you to encourage your students to apply for a Fulbright experience. I lived with an Italian student who didn't speak much English, and although I had studied Italian before I went, my Italian became fluent very quickly as a result, and I would highly recommend that for anybody who is embarking on an international experience, to really insert yourself into the culture by living with someone who doesn't speak your own language. I had 9 months of research in various archives and libraries in Turin on my dissertation topic, which is listed in the bulletin. And that led to the subsequent publication of my dissertation by the Research Institute, who sponsored, well, not sponsored, but with whom I became affiliated when I was there. So that was something that wasn't foreseen at the beginning. That was really a benefit to my subsequent development as a scholar. I guess that's it. I'm going to turn it over to the rest of you. But I'm willing to take your comments and questions. I can't say enough about how positive experience it was. Oh, I do remember one more thing. When I got finished with my dissertation, of course, there aren't very many jobs in musicology ever, anywhere, but there were even fewer that year. And my Fulbright experience led to my temporary work experience as an administrative professional within international studies. They were looking for someone with international experience, administrative experience, and with a PhD. And I had all three. And ultimately, it wasn't the career path that I chose. I went into academia, and I'm very happy where I am. But that's another door that was opened for me that I really didn't expect. So please encourage your students to apply for a Fulbright. It'll change their life in a good way.
I had a faculty Fulbright to Malaysia 5 years ago, and I'm about to start my second Fulbright. I'm so happy. In September, I'll go to Indonesia for 10 months. So I obviously liked the first one because I applied for the second one. I would have gone back to Indonesia, but I thought I probably wouldn't win that one if I tried again. Like, I liked it so much, I want to come back. So, you know, I figured out, well, you know, they're close, as they call Indonesia, Big Brother, not in a creepy way, in a, like, you know, like your good big brother. And I thought, yeah, well, I'll go there. And I started digging around with some vague contacts I had, and I learned that the biggest, well, really the only journalism program in the country is trying to create the first masters of journalism in the country. And I thought, well, that's a good hinge. And they had a teaching or research and teaching award. You just heard about how these work. And I thought, you know, I did both teaching and research on my Fulbright in Malaysia. And that was fine. I really liked the teaching because the teaching inserted me into the culture. Because I had a room, I actually had 40 students in each of my 2 master's classes that I taught. Yeah, so I knew 80 young and somewhat older adult Malaysians who were my students. And they like invited me to their houses for dinner and did all this stuff that like faculty were too busy to do. You know, I made like 2 really, really good friends on the faculty, but it was through the students that I really got inserted. So if you're debating between a teaching and research or a pure research, my guess would be if you go do pure research, unless you already have friends, it would be much harder for you to like get into the culture. Whereas when you have students, they want to like go to coffee with you, they want to take you to their house, they want to introduce you to their spouses, parents. Oh my God, I met so many grandmothers. I went to a wedding, a guy invited me to his auntie's wedding because he was going to be the best man. And his mother said, why don't you invite your teacher? She's a foreigner, and she's probably never seen one of our weddings. And that was awesome. You know, it lasted all day, and it was great. So I really think the teaching experience was good. So when I applied for my second Fulbright, which I did last summer, and I just found out the details, I think I got the letter at the end of March. I thought, you know, forget the whole research thing. I'll just go for teaching because this university has a need for teaching, the kind of teaching I already do. And so I thought that would work out really well, and somehow I got, you know, won the lottery a second time. So I'm really gung-ho, you know, I'll go for a third one if I can, and because I hear Indonesia doesn't count as my second actually. And so, because of some special deal this year, so if that's true, I'll probably apply for a third one in 5 or 6 years, because it's great. And I mean, I could say details, you know, what did I learn, what did I get out of it, but my field's journalism, and I don't see any of you who I recognize, so you're probably not in my same field, but whatever your field is, your benefits that you get are sort of like everything you were saying. The biggest benefits you get are not the ones you expected. And like the ones you expected, yeah, I mean, you probably get those too, but you get these surprise extra benefits that you did not expect because you didn't know. Before you got there, you just didn't know what it was going to be. And it was all good. It was excellent. So.
I'm going to start out with a question for our colleague. Yeah, I served, in fact, I was chair of, was a very long title of the Americas Committee for the National Select for the Fulbright for 3 to 5 years in Washington in the 80s. And there used to be a restriction as to how often you can apply.
Yes, there, you've got to wait 5 years
I
between
said
grants.
5, it used to be even 10
Basic
at
program.
one point.
Yeah, it's moved back and forth over the years, you're
And I
absolutely
counted
right.
the days till
Yeah,
year 5.
Yeah, I wanted to say that, and I say that by counterpoint because at the time that I applied, and these were both senior postdoctoral grants that I applied for. In both cases, I taught, and I would agree with her on the teaching. That it's a great experience. And in Brazil, as Wilson knows, I don't speak Portuguese, but I spoke Spanish, and we accommodated with that. I mean, there are accommodations that can be made. With Brazil, I would argue, and again from my experience, that the letter of invitation from the institution was very important. It shows that they want you and they have something specifically in mind for you. So if you have a contact there and can get them to write a letter of support, I think that's quite important. My second experience in Spain came about in a curious way because I applied actually for a distinguished lecture award, I believe, distinguished something chair award in Berlin. And then I got a call, and I went through the ranks. I obviously had made it to the semifinals, and then I got they're also very helpful. It was like, I got a call from Washington saying, you didn't get that job, but we'd like to consider you for something else. Would you consider someplace else in Europe? And I said, yeah. I mean, at that, at that point I was retired, and the main, and that's how I ended up in Spain. With they're arranging things that way. And there again, I taught, my teaching experience was better with the students than with the faculty, because I was teaching a course on gender in a graduate department of history in Barcelona, but gender had never been taught, and they had absolutely no interest in teaching it again. I don't know why I don't know, this became their way of token of sort of saying, look, we're not prejudiced or something. But they really didn't have very much interest, so I didn't have very much contact with the faculty, but with the students, yes. And we spent there in Brazil, I was only there 1 month. It was a short fellowship. In Spain, I was there for a semester. And we enjoyed that immensely. And also, I should mention that the consul from Barcelona came to the local Fulbright meeting, and that was a godsend for us, because she said, all our books back home in the official pouch. So that also was a godsend for us. I'd rather leave it at that. I'd like to, why Brazil and Spain, as Cindy mentioned, I was director of the Center for Latin American Studies here. I've done most of my work in the Caribbean. My original interest in Brazil, and specifically in Bahia. I've been wanting to go to Bahia for 20 years and never been. And one of my former students was at the University of Bahia, and through her chair, she also, they submitted the letter of invitation. And I got that. I wanted to go to Bahia because I considered it, and I confirmed it, I think, by my experience, that it is really part of the Circum-Caribbean experience. It's part of the plantation slavery complex, and for those who are interested in issues of race and slavery and so on, that's very important. For Spain, it was much less. I certainly don't look at Spain as the mother country of the rest of Latin America, but I think it is important, and there's a great deal of interest within Spain on Latin America. So that also became of interest. I think I'll leave it at that.
We have a wonderful opportunity, the resources represented here up at this table, so please, let's have your questions and comments. Don't be bashful.
Yeah, I'm not sure who to direct it to. I guess maybe you're probably the best individual. I'm interested in going to Kenya for maybe a short term, maybe 2 to 6 week research program, and I have a collaborative institution. Which of these, the core program sounds like it's too long, but how about some of the specialist program? Is that the one to go?
Well, the problem with the specialist program is it's not for independent research. It's for collegial work that can be, if you were doing a project potentially, because the project has to be designed in the hosting country. Okay. They have to make a request that we match to the people in the specialist program. If it were some kind of, we need your advice on wildlife management, and we're going to be working in the Serengeti or something and looking at that might work, but it wouldn't be, we would like for you to come so you can go do research on your own. It has to be somehow collegial and based on a request from the institution. If it's in any of the core fields, the STEM fields, we just were able to get those added this past year to the specialist program, but it's specifically in education in those fields. So it has to have some sort of a bent that would be education. They would be going out to various villages or something and teaching something, helping to create an educational structure within the country. There are various ways to do it, but the one thing that the specialist program does not allow is individual research.
As a follow-up, I was just looking at, I guess it's the Scholar program. It said on number 4, Fulbright Scholar grants can be combined with other grants to internationalize existing research programs.
Yes.
Now, is a Scholar program something that you could do that short-term?
Well, the Scholar program is always going to be limited in time. So what you're going to find is there are a number of awards that give you a span of period, a span of time, 2 months to 12 months. You decide kind of on what the time frame is. So you may be able to negotiate that at some levels. That's a thing that you would always talk to the program officer about and say, well, this is what I really need.
Okay.
I could add 2 more weeks to make it into 2 months or something like that, but that's the maximum. Do you think that would fly in this particular country? And so that's one of those, as I say, the devil in the details issues that you kind of work out with a program officer who can give you better advice on the exact attitude of that particular country.
Okay.
And that's a country program I've never worked with. So, my guess would be exactly that, a guess at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Talk to Carrie Miller.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I have to make this question as confusing as possible so the answer can be as clear as possible. Fulbrights are for working in foreign countries.
Yes.
At what time does a person from a particular country now residing in the United States become a foreigner to that native country?
When you become a U.S. citizen.
Good answer.
Yes, sir.
So I have a question about, I've heard from other faculty that the UF is fairly supportive of Fulbright. And I guess I'd like to get the input from those of you who've been faculty or experienced stuff. Obviously, it's very difficult to time sabbatical and Fulbright. I'm ideally looking to have my sabbatical and then go on a Fulbright. Is that a reasonable expectation? What was kind of your experience with kind of cost sharing from yours?
I can tell you, my first one, I was unfunded by my university. I had been led to believe I was going to get a sabbatical, and then I didn't. And then I got the Fulbright, and then I had a decision. And my dean did say, well, why don't you ask them if you can defer the Fulbright? And in fact, I didn't even ask. I didn't want to. I wanted to go immediately. So I decided, okay, I have some savings in the bank. I'll just, and the only reason that I actually needed my savings in the bank was because I didn't want to rent my house. Okay, now if you rent your house, you don't pay a mortgage, but I paid my mortgage for 8 months in Malaysia and had no sabbatical and was paid like a Malaysian. So when I came back, my finances were a little bit depleted, okay? But I repeat, had I rented my house, I would have been fine, because being paid like a Malaysian in Malaysia is totally good. I was paid like the highest professor pay in their university. I was paid more than all my friends were paid, and I had extra, flight money, housing money. There was all kinds of extra money. So the amount for living in the country was fine, but if you have other things you have to pay back home, you need to consider that.
They are not as high as university salaries, but UF has been good about matching. I don't know with the current economic crisis.
Oh, my department gave me zilch.
So imagine you getting a similar salary that you would be getting in Europe and those countries.
Like I said, I was paid more than my friends who were associate professors in that university.
Well, I guess being from the UF perspective, I have heard that there's some degree of matching going on, but I wasn't sure how much of that. And then I guess my other follow-up question relates to benefits for dependents.
Yeah.
Because I had two small kids.
I don't know how that works.
How does it work for benefits?
Yeah, I'll follow up on that too.
The benefits you have to,
But is that
you
something
basically have to make some financial sacrifice.
Would you be willing to comment on that, Andy? You
Well,
mentioned something before.
In terms of benefits through Fulbright, you get amounts of money that vary country by country. That's why I say that's listed. The State Department also gives you insurance policy that covers only the grantee. So if you have family members, it's only going to cover you. And the State Department declares that that is considered secondary coverage. So one of the things that we do when we talk to administrators is among the things that we ask them to do is continue to cover you through your insurance in your home university. Some do and some don't. Sometimes you have to pay for it, sometimes they pay for it. Once again, that's very much a local option. We're always happy to make the suggestions and tell people what we find to be best practice opportunities and what other institutions may do. Sometimes they haven't thought about it, but that's always going to be, it's going to depend. Some universities, especially big universities, I found often vary department to department or school to school, which always strikes me as kind of chaotic, but anyway, that's just the way it's set up. Some have overarching policies. As I mentioned earlier today, Texas A&M, it's just like we take care of everything, period, that's it. So some schools will approach it that way, for others you may have to negotiate.
Yeah, I guess from our perspective, the Fulbright really does look at the family as, I mean, if you have family, children, and wife, it would be very difficult to travel without some kind of insurance or.
Well, I did get I was recently married to John at that point, and they did cover his travel. And maybe some health insurance. I'm trying to remember.
Because that would be a decisive factor if you did.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and it's going to vary.
I think the amount of the stipend also depends.
Especially if you want to do a longer term, if you want to spend, let's say, 9 months or so.
Well, it's going to vary by country. Some countries will pay additional money for maintenance, which is, housing and food. Some will pay additional travel allowances for up to 2 dependents. At one time, you could add family members to the State Department insurance. That's no longer possible because everybody has budget issues. And the State Department is what we call a self-insurer, which means they set aside a portion of their budget that's to take care of all insurance claims that are made against the policies that they give.
Yeah. But you can combine your Fulbright with a sabbatical per se, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're
That's
delighted.
the one that's
Yeah.
coming up. I got a sabbatical, and so I'm having both at once, so this time I probably save money instead of
Could be.
spending money.
Yes, sir.
So following on the family issue, if there are spouses that are applying to both have PhDs, but in different fields, do you encourage that kind of thing, and should we refer to each other's applications, or how does that work?
If you have spouses and they're both academics, should they apply separately? Absolutely. I oversaw a number of grants in which both a husband and a wife got the grant. Now, if you're taking dependent children, you can't both claim the children. That's considered not moral. So, you've only got 2 and you can't claim 4 or whatever. But I always encourage that, and frankly, it's typically easier if you are in different fields. Because some country programs are 4 grants or something, and if you're both in exactly the same field, the idea that that country is going to give over half of its program to 2 people doing exactly the same thing is much less likely. It might work that way, it has, but typically it's better if you're in different fields. Sometimes only one gets it, and you have to make the decision. I had one person turn it down. She kept saying, but my husband needs it more. It's like, yeah, but you got the grant. And she finally turned it down. She said, well, my husband needs it more than I do, so I'm not going. It's like, okay, that's entirely your choice. But yes, I always recommend you both apply.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
I have one that's specific to my area. I'm an academic librarian. I know that library science is listed under some of the countries, some of the fields that some countries will honor requests for. And I was wondering if the expectation is usually that the person be for example, a teacher in the School of Library Science, or is it generally more to carry out research in, for example, communications, scholarly communications in a given country, or I know that the teaching and research, or teaching/research, there are these distinctions, and I'm trying to understand how that would fit my case.
Well, basically, the answer to your question is yes.
Okay, great.
It's going to vary. Once again, I oversaw grants in library science. Some of them were research grants. Some of them were, this is how we now organize libraries. This is how we do electronic libraries. We do all kinds of things. There's a special award in Egypt in the recently reconstructed Library of Alexandria. Where, which I think is just like, oh my God, that sounds so cool. But it's also about electronic librarianship. And so, once again, it will vary by country, by exactly what you do, what your specializations are. I think library science is one of those fields where I think you want to be as knowledgeable as possible of what's going on in that country, because it is a field that, you know, they're not going to be looking for you to put cards in the back of books or something, or put the Dewey Decimal System on it. So that's probably not going to work. But what the sorts of specializations, because there are all kinds of librarianship these days, what the specializations are that you bring will probably be applicable country by country. They're not necessarily going to be the same. But yes, library science is certainly a field that we work with.
Because he came in just a couple of minutes late, we've been working him hard to let me introduce at the end of the table, Mr. Walter Jackson. Hello. Who is the director of the U.S. Student Programs, and he works out of New York. We're delighted to have him here with us as well. More questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, another specific question. For law, is there some sort of statement in terms of what's the terminal degree for all the countries, or would you have to go country by country?
It varies quite dramatically. It also varies on what kinds of law that you do. We have two different law review processes in the United States. One is for more professional applied law, and the other is for academic law. Do you teach law? Do you practice law? Do you do both? Whatever. So it's going to depend on kind of what your background looks like and what the country is. So depending upon what it is you want to apply to do, et cetera, that will have a large impact on kind of, on how viable you are. But we get people with JDs and LLDs and all kinds of stuff. And so that law is one of those variable fields. And oftentimes the degree has to do with, the degree issues have as much to do with what you do with law as anything else, because practicing lawyers may do one thing based on a certain degree, whereas academic law teachers may do something else and have a different set of credentials. So it'll kind of depend. Does that help?
But what you're basically saying is, for instance, if I'm interested in France, where I've been several times, I would have to check with each individual opportunity, or the embassy, or the hosting, in terms of, for that country, in terms of...
With the way the French program is constructed, basically, if you would probably apply under the All Disciplines Award, which is wide open, and it's going to depend on what is it that you want to do in France. It is a research program. It does not have a teaching component because of French visa law.
Yeah.
It's just too much trouble. And so the French have said, do research. And so, and it requires a letter of invitation. Some countries do, many don't. So you would need a letter of invitation from an institute or something, depending upon an archive, et cetera, whatever it is that you want to do. And that would help to determine, obviously, what your position is vis-a-vis degree and proposal. So it would be very specific to France. And it's a possibility that if you were doing something that was intrinsically French, as opposed to something that's more general, and you might also look at the French Studies Award, because those are for things that have to be done in France because they are French in nature. The All Disciplines Award is you're going to do it in France because it so happens that that's where this works better, as opposed to being necessarily truly French in nature. I don't know if that helps, but like if I were teaching French literature, I'd apply for the French Studies Award. If I were doing physics, I would apply for the All Disciplines Award, because physics might be able, I could do it in Mozambique or in India. It so happens that the institute is in France. Whereas if I were doing French literature, I would have to do that in France because it's the only place where these archives or something would be available. I don't know if that helps or not.
Yeah, it helps a little.
One tip that I can give from my award to Malaysia, I didn't know any particular university, I didn't have any contacts. And so I had sort of assumed that the Fulbright body, the office there in country would know all the journalism programs and hook me up. But in the meantime, I'd been researching and looking around. So when they sent me a letter and said, oh, we think we're going to hook you up with this particular university, I said, oh my gosh, no, their journalism program is tiny and their faculty are not the kind of faculty I want to work with. I didn't say it that way, but I said, this other university is much more like my university and it's the same kind of program. And there was even a little bit of back and forth because the guy there, who's an American guy who heads that office, the university he wanted to put me in was much more prestigious. And I said, I don't care, I like the program at the other one. And then he just said, okay, and that's where I went. So sometimes
But they usually have
it's
to
very
put up-
flexible.
They have to put up some money.
Yeah,
Not necessarily.
they did,
Well, it
They
did,
put
yeah,
up a bunch of
depends.
money. They were happy to have me. It's just that he wasn't gonna give me to them. He was gonna give me to somebody else.
What-
No, but I mean, the university also gives some.
The one there, yeah, that's what I mean. They
Well-
did, yeah.
Well, does that become kind of a three-way then, in terms of it's not just between you and that person, but then the institution you're interested in?
I never
They
spoke to the
kinda go.
institution in that case, but
Oh.
some people speak to the institution before they even apply.
Uh-huh.
You know, it goes in all different directions. Every application tends to be unique and different from every other one, and people's experiences vary dramatically. If you're proposing to teach in the People's Republic of China, you do not make contact with the host institution, period. If you're proposing to do research, yes, you do.
Yeah.
That's China. In Russia, you don't have to have any contacts. Some people do, some people don't. We have an office in Moscow. They will make a placement for you. You know, in France, you have to have a relationship because you need one of those letters. So it's going to vary by country program and what you want to do, et cetera. You know, and as I say, the devil is always in the details, and the details lie with the specific country program.
But there are people that will tell you whether you're stepping on toes, because, you know, in France,
Sure.
I have a lot of contacts, but I don't want to have a misstep in terms of getting somebody at an institution who's not as familiar, say, with Fulbright, trying to push for something when actually maybe there's another way it's supposed to be done.
Well, that's just it. France is wide open in
Okay.
terms of locales.
Yeah.
The French Fulbright Commission, as far as I know, after working with them, doesn't have any particular prejudice one way or the other. So that's often, as you think about from whom you're going to get this letter of invitation, that's a process that you may want to explore, you know, kind of in the margins and be asking questions and, you know, talking to your contacts about, well, would this be appropriate? Would it work at your institution, et cetera, before you get the letter?
Because it was mentioned as being quite important, I'd like to ask the three panelists about the letter of invitation. How did you go about doing that, and how did you let it make it happen?
My research was as a graduate student, so I didn't have one. I had letters that I received from the archives where I wanted to go and do independent research, confirming the materials were there and indicating the accessibility of those materials, and I included those. That was not a requirement, but I think that helped my application, helped strengthen it. But I was going for independent research, unaffiliated, and I got it. So I'm not sure that it's always really necessary to have an affiliation,
I didn't
for
have
graduate
one.
students anyway, for
I didn't have one
faculty.
for either one, because for the first grant, the 8-month grant in Malaysia, I didn't know anybody there at any university, so I didn't have anybody to ask.
You did select one university.
Well, in this negotiation with the office in country, but I never spoke to them until the day I showed up. But for the Indonesia grant, I actually knew a guy at the university, a faculty member, and he said he couldn't write the letter himself, his dean would have to do it. And he was asking his dean, but you know, it's like there's even more of a hierarchy, and his dean didn't write the letter. So as far as I know, the letter was never sent. Like, so on my application, it said, do you have a letter of what, invitation?
Invitation.
Right, and I said, no, and then there was another yes/no box, do you expect to get one? And I wrote yes, but as far as I know, I never got one, because the dean never got around to it.
I think it's important to remember in the Fulbright program that when we talk about affiliation, you're talking about 140 different types of affiliation. And what might be an appropriate affiliation in one country, what might be appropriate in Italy, is not necessarily going to be appropriate in Germany. For any number of reasons. Most usually it's visa requirements. So when we think about affiliation and getting letters and having invitations, I think it's really always best, if you have any questions, to talk directly with the country program manager and say, this is what I'm thinking about doing, and this is where I'm thinking about going, and this is who I want to work with. Just to make sure it's within the purview of what's going to work in that particular country on the Fulbright program.
Yeah, I would say it's contacts. It's who you know, or, you know, whether you know somebody directly or know someone who would know someone, that's, you know, I've been working in that field for years. But
If you want to contact anywhere from here to Brazil, she's the best.
Keep in
Yeah.
mind that if a letter is required, the program will say you must have a letter of invitation. France says you have to have a letter. Netherlands says you have to have a letter. Russia, you don't have to have anything. You don't even have to have a suggestion. If you have a letter, that's cool. It may not get you a grant, but that's fine. In China, as I've already mentioned, if you want to go teaching, don't have a letter. If you want to do research, do have a letter. So they're program specific. Some of the quick suggestions I would give you is we have scholar lists online, U.S. and visiting. They go back a number of years. Look at our scholar list, contact especially the Americans who are in that country or who are in that country in your field and say, what can you tell me about this country? What do they do there? Who's a good person to contact? They'll often help you because Fulbrighters tend to stick together because I show up on campus and scare them. Look at who's publishing in your field. Look at your memberships in the associations that you belong to, because most of them have international components. These are all other sociologists or whatever. Contact them and find out what's going on in this country. Look on your campus. This is a highly internationalized campus. You've got lots of faculty and students from abroad. You've got 5,000 international students on this campus. Those are people who can give you an idea of what's going on in that country and what institution is better for this or better for that. It's always best to start locally. I would always recommend that you look at your home campus first, because there's a lot of information here. This is an unusual campus because you've got such a high level of support, and in the hub you've got this enormous center of lots of people who are very knowledgeable and can help direct you. So there are a lot of ways to do this, and you can always contact us, of course. The trick that I always mention is that you invent the program every year, because you keep coming up with institutions we've never worked with topics we've never seen before. So we may be able to help you, and we're glad to do it. We may have to do research. I did it on a number of occasions myself to try to help direct people. There are a lot of ways to do this. I know it's somewhat daunting at times, but always contact a program officer. If you're not clear about a letter of invitation, do I need it, don't I need it? But then start thinking immediately, how can I make contact if I don't already have one?
You want to add a comment to that?
yeah, I know, I had a question, and that's specifically for the gentleman at the end. When I had the one in Spain, when we had the meetings of the Fulbright committee, which are helpful, there were a lot of students who were just finishing or had just finished the BA, who got a grant. Many more, some of us, we senior people were a little miffed at that, because we felt that the senior people and the doctoral candidates really need this, you know, with the cutback and other kinds of grants needed so much more. But is that still true? It's still
Yes, in the student program, it was about 10 years ago, the Board of Foreign Scholarships, which, as Andy said, is the policymaking for the policymaking body for the Fulbright program, said that the Fulbright student program really needs to get back to its roots, and its roots were with younger students earlier on in their academic careers to try to start building interest in things that were international. So, to do so, ECA, which is the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, established what is sort of affectionately called the Central Fund, which was a pot of money which was specifically to fund grants to graduating seniors. Fulbright requires that you have your BA or its equivalent by the beginning date of the grant, so these would have been recent graduates. So there's a separate pot of money that is specifically there to fund those particular types of candidates worldwide, so that advanced graduate students do not necessarily suffer in the overall awarding of grants.
And
So
there
it
were 4 of
depends.
them in Malaysia when I was there, and they were awesome. Like, I was so proud to know them. They were great.
So it depends on any given competition cycle year what your spread of degree levels is going to look like. In one given year, you may have a really great group of recent BAs, and the MAs and the PhDs might not necessarily be as wonderful. So it varies, and next year they could be all graduate students, and you really never know, because every competition, every annual competition in the student program is very separate and distinct in the nature of the applicant pools, because they're being reviewed one against the other.
Yes, sir.
And is the timeline the same for them? In other words, would they be applying in their third year of an undergrad degree to start a program the year after graduation?
Just so that we can keep it simple and not be very terribly confusing, we have a totally different calendar than the scholar program. The student program is an annual competition as well, opening in May with an end of October deadline date. So one would begin the process in May of their junior year, file the application in October of their senior year, get a preliminary result in January, find out anywhere between February and June if they had been selected. Typically, an award would then begin in September or October following their graduation. Unless they're applying to one of the Southern Hemisphere countries where the academic year is flipped 2 hours. In that case, they might not take up their award till February or March in this cycle of 2013.
We're keeping everyone on a fairly tight schedule today, and we're working our two guests from New York and Washington very hard. We're going to continue again in about 10 or 15 minutes. Any final shots from either our faculty panel or from any of you?
Well, I would like to make a shot, and I would like to make a plug for the student program and tell you as faculty how important you are in the recruitment process of students. All of our research has found that faculty encouragement gets students into the Fulbright student program. I couldn't possibly do that. Your encouragement, your working with students really gets them into the process, makes them successful. So I would encourage you as faculty members to look for students who are Fulbrightable, who look like they would make great Fulbrighters, and point them in the direction of the Fulbright office here. Encourage them, work with them on their applications. Your support is very, very important to them. That's my plug for the student.
Thank you for that comment, and let's express our appreciation to the panel.